Imagine for a moment a world without books lining shelves, without maps guiding explorers, without the rustle of money changing hands, a world where knowledge was carved into stone tablets, pressed into heavy clay, or painted on precious silk, accessible only to kings, priests, and the privileged few. That was the reality for most of human history before one humble invention changed everything. Today, we're exploring the extraordinary story of paper, a material so common we often overlook it, yet so revolutionary it fundamentally reshaped civilization. This isn't just a tale of technology, it's a saga of cultural upheaval, silenced voices finding expression, and ideas leaping across continents. Paper didn't just make writing easier, it made knowledge democratic, turning what was once a luxury for the elite into a tool for the many. From its mysterious origins in ancient China to its role in sparking the Renaissance, the scientific revolution, and the spread of religions, paper has been a quiet force behind some of humanity's most transformative moments. We'll trace its journey along the Silk Road, where secrets of papermaking were smuggled like treasure, and into the workshops of medieval Europe, where monks preserved the wisdom of antiquity on its durable surface. We'll see how it helped fuel the printing press explosion, challenged powerful institutions, and even played a part in revolutions and wars. But the story doesn't end in the past. Paper remains deeply woven into our lives today, from the books we cherish to the currency we trust, defying predictions of a digital takeover. So why does this ancient material still matter in our age of screens and satellites? Because paper carries with it the weight of human connection, the tangible feel of a turning page, the intimacy of a handwritten letter, the permanence of a printed record. In this video, we'll uncover the hidden history, the unsung heroes, and the surprising mysteries behind paper's enduring legacy. You'll discover how something as simple as pressed pulp became a catalyst for global change, and why, even now, it continues to shape how we learn, create, and communicate. This is more than a history lesson. It's an invitation to see the world differently through the pages that helped build it. Before paper, the quest to record our thoughts and stories led civilizations to experiment with some truly remarkable, yet deeply flawed materials. In ancient China, the primary writing surfaces were heavy bamboo strips, which were incredibly durable but terribly cumbersome. A single book could require an entire cart to transport. Then there was silk, light and beautiful but prohibitively expensive, a luxury item reserved for the emperor and his inner circle. Far to the west, in Egypt and the Mediterranean, the papyrus plant was the answer. While lighter than bamboo, papyrus was brittle, susceptible to moisture, and couldn't be folded, limiting its use to scrolls. Each of these materials placed a hard ceiling on the spread of information, ensuring that literacy and learning remained the exclusive domain of the wealthy and powerful. Knowledge itself was trapped, weighed down by the very surfaces it was written on. This all began to change in the Han Dynasty, a period of incredible cultural and technological flourishing in China. And here we meet a figure whose name is forever tied to paper, Cai Lun, a court official and a trusted eunuch in the imperial court. Historical records from the year 105 CE credit him with presenting the first true paper to Emperor He. His process was a stroke of genius in its simplicity and resourcefulness. He took the inner bark of mulberry trees, mixed it with old hemp rags, fish nets, and other fibrous waste, and mashed it all into a pulpy slurry with water. This pulp was then poured onto a flat screen mold, allowing the water to drain away and leaving behind a mat of interwoven fibers. Once pressed and dried in the sun, this mat became a sheet of paper, strong, flexible, surprisingly white, and most importantly, far cheaper and easier to produce than anything that had come before it. For this achievement, Cai Lun was even ennobled, a testament to the immense value the imperial court placed on his invention. But the story, like a good piece of paper, has more layers than it first appears. While Cai Lun's report is the first official documentation, archaeology suggests the truth is a bit more mysterious. Excavations in China have uncovered paper fragments that are significantly older, some dating back 200 years before Cai Lun's time. These ancient samples, found at sites like a watchtower in the Gansu province, weren't used for writing. Instead, they were employed for humbler tasks, wrapping precious bronze mirrors for burial, padding the inside of armor for comfort, and even, intriguingly, as a primitive form of toilet paper. This tells a different story, not of a single eureka moment, but of a slow, organic evolution. Paper likely began as a practical craft material, developed by unknown artisans over generations, before someone like Cai Lun recognized its potential, refined the recipe, and standardized its production for the highest purpose of all, writing. The true revolution of paper wasn't just technological, it was social. By drastically reducing the cost and increasing the availability of a writing surface, paper began to dismantle the monopoly on knowledge. It was no longer just about imperial decrees and philosophical treatises for the elite. Suddenly, merchants could keep better ledgers, poets could share their verses more widely, and students could afford to own their own texts. Ideas could travel lighter and faster, moving from the isolated courts of scholars into a broader stream of society. This single invention set in motion a chain reaction that would eventually ripple across the entire globe, starting with its first great journey along the Silk Road. For centuries, the secret of papermaking was one of ancient China's most closely guarded state treasures. The imperial government understood that this revolutionary technology provided a massive economic and cultural advantage, and they were determined to maintain their monopoly. Exporting actual paper was one thing. Luxurious sheets traveled west along the Silk Road as expensive trade goods, admired by those who encountered them, but the knowledge of how to create it was protected with immense seriousness. Leaking the production methods was considered an act of treason, punishable by death. This intense secrecy meant that for hundreds of years, while silk, spices, and other luxuries flowed freely across the continents, the formula for turning rags and bark into knowledge remained locked within China's borders. This technological blockade was finally shattered not by trade or diplomacy, but by war. In the year 751, a pivotal clash between the expanding Tang dynasty and the rising Abbasid Caliphate occurred near the Talas River in modern-day Kazakhstan. The Battle of Talas was a decisive victory for the Abbasid forces, and among the Chinese soldiers captured were several artisans who possessed a priceless skill. They knew how to make paper. Their captors, recognizing the immense value of this knowledge, offered them a choice far better than imprisonment or execution. In exchange for their freedom and likely substantial rewards, these skilled prisoners agreed to reveal the closely held secrets of papermaking. This moment of cultural transmission in the aftermath of battle set in motion an intellectual revolution. The Islamic world, particularly in cities like Baghdad and Samarkand, didn't just adopt the Chinese technique, they refined and industrialized it. They began using linen and flax instead of mulberry bark, creating a stronger, more versatile sheet. They perfected the use of water-powered trip hammers to pulverize the raw materials into a finer pulp, moving production from a manual craft to a mechanized process. These advanced paper mills, or papeteries, began springing up across the Muslim world, from the glittering capital of Baghdad to the bustling trade centers of Damascus and Cairo. Paper was no longer a rare import, it was becoming a ubiquitous domestic product. This accessibility fueled an extraordinary cultural and scientific flourishing known as the Islamic Golden Age. As Europe entered its so-called Dark Ages, the great libraries and translation houses of the Muslim world, like the famed House of Wisdom in Baghdad, became the guardians of global knowledge. Scholars meticulously translated the works of Greek philosophers, Roman engineers, and Persian scientists from fragile papyrus and expensive parchment onto durable, affordable paper. The thoughts of Aristotle, the geometry of Euclid, the medical texts of Galen all were saved from potential oblivion, copied and recopied by scribes, and disseminated widely thanks to this new medium. The impact of paper's journey was far more profound than a simple transfer of manufacturing. It became the physical backbone for an unprecedented exchange of ideas. Along those same Silk Road routes that carried bales of paper, concepts in mathematics like algebra and the numeral system we use today, including the life-changing concept of zero, traveled from India to the West. Astronomical charts, medical knowledge, and philosophical debates were all recorded, debated, and spread on paper. It also became the primary medium for the Quran and religious scholarship, standardizing Islamic doctrine and enabling the faith to spread with a consistency that would have been impossible before. This story makes us wonder what other world-altering secrets were carried by the merchants, pilgrims, and yes, even the prisoners who traversed the vast networks of the Silk Road. Paper was more than a commodity, it was a catalyst. It carried not just ink, but the very building blocks of civilizations, connecting East and West in a dialogue written on its surface and setting the stage for a future where knowledge would ultimately belong to everyone. While the Islamic world was experiencing its golden age, much of Europe was mired in what historians once called the Dark Ages, a period where the vast libraries of Rome were a distant memory and the primary writing material was parchment. Creating a single page of parchment was a grueling process, requiring the skin of a sheep or calf to be scraped, soaked, limed, and stretched. A complete Bible could demand the skins of over 200 animals, making books astonishingly expensive luxury items, often chained to desks in monasteries to prevent theft. This wasn't just an economic barrier, it was a profound bottleneck on the entire intellectual life of a continent, confining knowledge to a tiny, privileged clerical elite. The arrival of paper from the Islamic world, first through the bustling trade hubs of Moorish Spain and later through the merchant ports of Italy, didn't just offer a cheaper alternative, it created a paradigm shift. By the 13th century, the first water-powered paper mills began appearing in places like Fabriano, Italy, and Zátiva, Spain. These mills harnessed river currents to power trip hammers that pulverized linen and cotton rags into a fine pulp, a process far more efficient than the manual labor required for parchment. Suddenly, the cost of a writing surface plummeted. Where a single sheet of parchment might cost a day's wages for a skilled laborer, a sheet of paper cost a fraction of that. This affordability was the key that began to unlock the vast storehouses of knowledge. Monasteries, the traditional centers of learning, were among the first to embrace this new medium. Scribes who had spent years meticulously copying religious texts onto precious parchment now had a more plentiful surface on which to work. But the real revolution happened when paper reached the newly emerging universities in cities like Bologna, Paris, and Oxford. For the first time, students didn't have to rely solely on listening to a professor read from a single, chained master copy. They could afford to own their own paper notebooks called codices and could take notes during lectures, creating personal textbooks. This simple act transformed education from passive listening to active engagement, fostering debate, critical thinking, and the personal ownership of ideas. This explosion of available paper also fueled an artistic and scholarly renaissance in its own right, the creation of illuminated manuscripts. While we often associate these breathtaking works with parchment, paper became the canvas for a less extravagant but far more widespread form of book production. Artisans and scribes could experiment more freely on paper, sketching designs, practicing scripts, and creating beautiful, though less costly, illustrated texts. It was on these paper pages that the great works of antiquity, preserved and translated by Islamic scholars, began to be copied and circulated throughout Europe. The philosophical works of Aristotle and Plato, the mathematical theorems of Euclid, the medical knowledge of Galen, all were translated from Arabic into Latin and disseminated on paper. Without this durable and affordable medium, these foundational texts, which had been lost to Western Europe for centuries, might have remained confined to a few libraries in the East, their rediscovery delayed or never happening at all. Paper, therefore, became the unsung hero of the intellectual revival that would blossom into the Renaissance. It was the necessary physical infrastructure for the rebirth of ideas. It allowed knowledge to be replicated not in dozens of copies for cathedrals and kings, but in hundreds of copies for universities, merchants, and a growing literate class. This democratization of information began to erode the monopoly on learning held by the church and the aristocracy, setting the stage for the critical questioning and scientific inquiry that would define the modern world. The stage was now set for an invention that would harness the potential of paper like never before, turning this medium of preservation into a weapon of mass dissemination. Yet for all its world-altering potential, Gutenberg's brilliant machine would have been nothing more than an expensive and impractical curiosity without the right material to print on. Imagine trying to use his press with the writing surfaces of the past. Parchment made from animal skin was far too expensive and irregular in thickness. The delicate type would have pressed unevenly, creating a blotchy, unreadable mess. Papyrus, on the other hand, was too brittle and fibrous. It would have cracked and splintered under the immense pressure of the screw press. The success of movable type demanded a surface that was simultaneously durable, flexible, perfectly flat, and most critically, affordable enough to be produced in massive quantities. Paper, which had been steadily evolving in Europe for centuries, was the only candidate that checked every single box. Its unique physical properties made it the perfect technological partner. The interlocking fibers of linen and cotton rag created a mat that was strong enough to withstand the press's pressure without tearing, yet soft and absorbent enough to pull the oil-based ink cleanly from the metal type, resulting in a sharp, crisp impression. Unlike the varying textures of animal skin, paper could be produced in large, uniform sheets, ensuring every page in a book had the same consistent quality. This reliability was essential for the new process of mass production, but perhaps paper's greatest advantage was its economics. While a single parchment Bible required the skins of hundreds of animals, a paper version needed only bales of discarded rags and a mill to pulverize them. This cost efficiency is what truly unlocked the printing press's revolutionary power, turning the book from a handcrafted treasure into an reproducible product. The combination was nothing short of explosive. Where a monastic scribe might spend a year producing a single copy of the Bible, Gutenberg's press could produce hundreds of identical copies in the same amount of time. This wasn't just an increase in speed, it was a fundamental shift in scale. Print shops, often allied with paper mills, began springing up across European cities, creating a new information economy. The output was staggering. It's estimated that in the first 50 years after Gutenberg, more books were printed than all the scribes of Europe had produced in the previous 1,000 years. This wasn't limited to just grand folios for churches and nobles. The press and paper together enabled a flood of smaller, cheaper formats: pamphlets, broadsheets, academic texts, and eventually newspapers. Information had been transformed from a scarce resource into a readily available commodity. This newfound accessibility of the printed word directly empowered movements that would shatter the established order. When Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the church door in Wittenberg in 1517, it was the printing press and cheap paper that turned a local academic debate into a continent-wide revolution. Luther's writings, printed as pamphlets and spread by merchants and travelers, were read and debated not just by theologians but by shopkeepers and farmers. For the first time, people could read religious arguments for themselves in their own languages and form their own opinions outside the authority of the Church. The Protestant Reformation was, in many ways, the first revolution powered by mass media. Similarly, the scientific revolution was fueled by paper. Scientists like Copernicus and Galileo could publish their findings, complete with detailed diagrams and charts, and share them with colleagues across Europe, creating a collaborative network of knowledge that accelerated discovery and challenged ancient dogma. The most profound change, however, was the quiet revolution in everyday minds. As books and pamphlets became more common, literacy ceased to be the exclusive domain of the clergy and the elite. A growing middle class of merchants, lawyers, and artisans saw the value in reading, and literacy rates began their slow, steady climb. People were no longer solely dependent on authorities to tell them what was true. They could read it for themselves. This empowerment of the individual thinker, the critical reader, is perhaps the most enduring legacy of this perfect partnership between press and paper. It laid the groundwork for the Enlightenment, for democratic revolutions, and for the modern world itself, all starting with the simple, durable sheet that gave a voice to millions. This newfound power of the printed word did not go unnoticed by those already in authority. They quickly realized that the very medium which could spread ideas of revolution could also be harnessed as an unparalleled tool for control. Long before Gutenberg, paper had already become the silent engine of empire. Consider the Mongols, who under Genghis Khan and his successors ruled the largest contiguous land empire in history. Their terrifying cavalry might have conquered the territories, but it was paper that allowed them to govern. They established a sophisticated postal relay system, the yam, where messengers on horseback carried official documents written on paper across thousands of miles. These dispatches contained census data, tax records, imperial decrees, and military orders, creating a flow of information that allowed a central authority in Karakoram to administer lands from the Pacific Ocean to the gates of Europe. Without paper, the Mongol Empire would have been an ungovernable sprawl, fracturing under its own immense weight almost immediately. This model of bureaucratic control was perfected by later empires, most notably the Ottomans. In the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, an entire army of scribes toiled in rooms dedicated to paperwork, meticulously recording every detail of the state. The Tauria Defteri, or survey registers, were vast paper ledgers that catalogued the population, land ownership, and agricultural production of every province. This information was the lifeblood of the empire, used to calculate taxes, conscript soldiers, and allocate resources with a precision that was previously unimaginable. Paper became the physical manifestation of the state's memory and its reach, allowing the Sultan's will to be communicated, enforced, and recorded from the Balkans to Baghdad with a consistency that fostered both stability and subjugation. The control was so complete that the very phrase red tape, originates from the red ribbons used to bind official Ottoman government documents. Religions, too, recognized paper's power to standardize and spread faith with unwavering consistency. For centuries, sacred texts were copied by hand onto parchment, a process that inevitably introduced small variations and errors with each new generation of scribes. The advent of paper and later printing changed this dynamic forever. In the Islamic world, the widespread availability of paper allowed for the mass production of the Quran. While calligraphers continued to create breathtaking artistic masterpieces, cheaper printed editions ensured that the word of Allah could be found in homes and schools across the Muslim world, creating a unified theological foundation. Buddhist missionaries traveling the Silk Road carried not just oral teachings but paper copies of sutras, which could be translated and reproduced locally, allowing Buddhism to take root and flourish in cultures as diverse as those of China, Korea, and Japan. In each case, paper acted as a doctrinal anchor, preventing the natural drift of oral traditions and ensuring that core beliefs remained intact across vast distances and centuries. Yet, this power to unify and control inherently contained its dark opposite, the power to censor and suppress. If paper could spread orthodoxy, it could also spread heresy. If it could carry the emperor's decree, it could also carry a revolutionary's manifesto. Authorities were therefore faced with a new dilemma: how to control this flood of information. The response was often brutal and unequivocal. The Catholic Church established the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, its list of forbidden books, and authorities from Spain to Italy regularly staged public burnings of texts deemed dangerous. In Ming Dynasty China, the state maintained a tight grip on publishing, and emperors could order the destruction of entire print runs of books that criticized the government or promoted unorthodox ideas. The control of paper, who could produce it, what could be printed on it, and who had access to the final product, became a primary battleground in the struggle between authority and individual thought. This tension, born from paper's very utility, reveals a fundamental truth: the same tool that built empires and preserved faith could also become the most potent weapon for those who sought to challenge them. For centuries, the creation of paper remained a meticulous, hands-on craft. Papermakers would dip their molds into a vat of pulpy water, lift them out, shake them to mesh the fibers, and then carefully couch or lay each delicate sheet onto a felt blanket for pressing and drying. It was an artisanal process, slow and physically demanding, limiting output to what a skilled crew could produce by hand in a day. But as the 18th century gave way to the 19th, a tidal wave of change was building. The Age of Enlightenment had sparked a hunger for knowledge, the population was booming, and literacy rates were climbing. The world was generating more information than ever before, and the old ways simply couldn't keep up. The demand for paper, particularly from the exploding newspaper industry and the new phenomenon of serialized novels, was insatiable. The stage was set not for an evolution, but for a full-scale industrial revolution in papermaking. The breakthrough that shattered the production bottleneck arrived from an unlikely source: France. In 1799, a Parisian stationer named Louis-Nicolas Robert, frustrated by the labor disputes and slow pace at the manual paper mill where he worked, envisioned a machine that could produce a continuous web of paper. He patented a design for a moving wire mesh belt that could carry a continuous stream of pulp through rollers that would press out the water. Though Robert's own venture failed, his idea was perfected in England by the Fourdrinier brothers, Henry and Seeley, who invested a fortune into developing the machine that would forever bear their name. The Fourdrinier machine was a marvel of engineering. It automated the entire process. A headbox distributed a smooth slurry of pulp onto an endlessly moving wire mesh conveyor, where water drained away, felt-covered rollers then blotted more moisture out before the now solid sheet was wound onto a massive drying cylinder heated by steam. For the first time in history, paper was not made sheet by laborious sheet, but in an unbroken, breathtakingly fast roll that could be miles long. The impact was nothing short of transformative. A single Fourdrinier machine, operated by a small crew, could produce in one day what a traditional mill of 40 men might produce in several weeks. The cost of paper plummeted, making it truly ubiquitous. This industrial leap directly fueled the creation of modern mass media. The penny press, affordable newspapers for the common person, flourished. Public libraries filled their shelves with cheaply printed novels by authors like Charles Dickens, whose stories were often first published in serialized form in these new periodicals. The rise of department stores and branded goods created an entirely new use for paper, packaging. Everything from cereal to soap was now wrapped and boxed in paperboard, a sturdy derivative. Paper became the invisible infrastructure of daily modern life, from the morning newspaper on the doorstep to the train ticket in your pocket and the shopping bag you carried home. Yet this incredible abundance came with a profound and largely unacknowledged cost. The very efficiency of the machines created a voracious appetite for raw material that far outstripped the traditional supply of linen and cotton rags. Papermakers desperately turned to a new source, wood. The invention of mechanical pulping in the 1840s, which ground wood logs against stones to separate the fibers, and later chemical pulping in the 1870s, which used acids to dissolve the lignin binding the wood together, solved the supply problem but created an environmental catastrophe. Vast swaths of ancient forests in Europe and North America were clear-cut to feed the hungry mills. The chemical processes, particularly the sulfite method, released sulfur compounds and other toxins directly into the air and nearby waterways, poisoning ecosystems and creating a foul stench that hung over entire mill towns. The paper boom had triggered a silent crisis, trading ecological health for cultural and commercial growth, a debt that would take more than a century to come due. This industrial leap had indeed democratized paper, but it had also, for the first time, industrialized its impact on the natural world. But perhaps the most profound cultural shift was the one that happened right inside the home, as paper transformed from a specialist tool into a domestic essential. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the industrial production of paper made it cheap enough to become a fixture of everyday life. Wallpaper, once a hand-painted luxury for the aristocracy, could now be mass-produced with printed patterns, allowing middle-class families to bring color and artistry into their living spaces. The greeting card industry was born, with paper enabling the exchange of sentiments for birthdays, holidays, and other milestones, creating new rituals of social connection. Even the concept of packaging took off. Paper bags and boxes replaced bulk containers, allowing for the sale of standardized products and the rise of brand identity. A simple paper bag from a department store wasn't just a utilitarian object. It was a symbol of modern consumer culture and personal acquisition. This blending of the practical and the expressive is where paper truly cemented its status as a cultural icon. It was never just one thing. It was the sacred and the mundane, the artistic and the administrative, the revolutionary and the routine, all woven into a single, accessible sheet. It provided a physical canvas for human emotion, creativity, and community in a way no material had before. It became so deeply embedded in the rituals of daily life that we often stopped seeing it, even as we relied on it completely. This silent, ubiquitous presence in our cultural DNA makes the story of its creation all the more compelling, raising the question of how some of the most beautiful and specialized papermaking techniques, developed over centuries, somehow managed to vanish almost without a trace. Yet for all the relentless forward march of industrial papermaking, a quiet counter-narrative exists, one of delicate, handcrafted techniques that flourished for centuries in isolated communities, only to fade toward extinction under the pressures of modernity. These were not merely different recipes for pulp, they were entire cultural ecosystems built around paper, each method a unique expression of its environment and people. In the high-altitude wetlands of Southeast Asia, for instance, a remarkable tradition emerged using the sacred lotus flower. Artisans, often monks in Myanmar and Thailand, would undertake a painstaking process. They harvested the long, fibrous stems of the lotus plant, making a careful cut to honor the spirit of the plant. These stems were then sliced open and scraped, releasing a sticky, organic sap. The fibers weren't mashed into a pulp as in Western methods, but were rather laid out in a specific, overlapping pattern on a cloth, using the natural sap as the binding agent. Each sheet was then pressed and dried in the sun. The resulting paper was not a bland, uniform white, but possessed a subtle, cloth-like texture, a gentle, natural hue, and was famously resilient to insects and moisture. Most importantly, it was imbued with spiritual significance. Paper made from the lotus, a symbol of purity and enlightenment in Buddhism, was considered the only appropriate surface for recording the most sacred sutras and temple documents. A world away, across the vast expanse of the Pacific, another profound paper tradition developed entirely independently: bark cloth or tapa. While not paper in the strictest technical definition, it served an identical cultural purpose as a medium for communication, art, and ritual. Across islands from Hawaii to Fiji to Tonga, artisans, primarily women, mastered the art of transforming the inner bark of the paper mulberry tree. The process was a communal and almost musical event. The bark was harvested, soaked, and then beaten for hours with grooved wooden mallets. The rhythm of the beating was a language in itself, and the overlapping grooves in the mallets helped to felt and spread the fibers into a thin, flexible sheet. These sheets were then decorated with intricate, symbolic patterns using natural dyes and pigments, telling stories of genealogy, mythology, and social status. A finished piece of tapa was not simply a material, it was a ceremonial garment, a wall hanging for important gatherings, a repository of ancestral knowledge, and a valuable item of trade and gift-giving that strengthened social bonds across entire archipelagos. So why did these intricate, beautiful, and deeply sustainable practices nearly vanish? The reasons are a complex tapestry of colonial pressure, economic shift, and cultural change. The arrival of European colonizers and missionaries in these regions often came with a dismissal of indigenous practices as primitive. Mass-produced, cheap European paper was introduced as a symbol of modernity and progress, quickly supplanting the labor-intensive local alternatives for everyday use. Furthermore, the very social structures that supported these crafts were disrupted. Colonial economies forced people into new forms of labor, breaking the chain of knowledge that was traditionally passed from elder to youth. As communities became more connected to a global cash economy, the weeks of work required to produce a single sheet of lotus paper or a finely decorated tapa cloth could not compete with the instant availability of a cheap, imported notebook. The knowledge, which had never been written down but was stored in muscle memory and oral tradition, began to fragment with each passing generation. Today, however, there is a growing movement to rediscover and preserve these lost techniques, and their value extends far beyond historical curiosity. In an era grappling with the environmental consequences of industrial paper production, these ancient methods offer a masterclass in closed-loop, sustainable manufacturing. They use renewable, locally abundant plants' lotus stems that regrow annually. the inner bark of trees that can be harvested without killing the plant. They require no toxic chemicals, bleaches, or heavy machinery, relying instead on human skill and natural processes. The revival of these crafts is not about rejecting modern paper entirely, but about learning from their principles of sustainability and their deep connection between material, maker, and community. They teach us that paper was never meant to be an anonymous, disposable commodity, but could be a meaningful artifact, a bearer of culture, and a testament to human ingenuity living in balance with the natural world. This forgotten wisdom, being carefully pieced back together by dedicated artisans and cultural historians, might just hold the key to a more thoughtful and sustainable relationship with the very stuff we write our future on. While we often picture warfare as a symphony of thundering cannons and charging cavalry, some of history's most decisive battles were orchestrated not on the battlefield, but in quiet rooms on the surface of a single sheet of paper. Long before the first shot was fired, the outcome of a conflict could be shaped by the meticulous lines of a map. For a military commander, a detailed, accurate map was a treasure beyond price, offering a god's-eye view of the terrain. It revealed where to position artillery on a commanding hill, the safest route for a supply convoy to avoid ambush, or the exact location of a hidden river ford that could allow an entire army to cross undetected. The creation of these maps was a painstaking art of surveying and cartography, and they were guarded with a level of secrecy comparable to that of nuclear codes today. Losing a map to the enemy could mean losing the war, as it would hand them your entire strategic playbook. Paper, in this role, became the ultimate force multiplier, turning geographical knowledge into a weapon as potent as any sword. But paper's power in war extended far beyond topography, into the far more nebulous and psychological realm of propaganda. The invention of the printing press turned paper into the first mass medium for psychological operations. During the Napoleonic Wars, all sides churned out thousands of pamphlets and satirical cartoons designed to ridicule the enemy, boost morale at home, and turn the local population in conquered territories against their invaders. This practice reached a terrifying sophistication during the two world wars. In the Second World War, entire squadrons of aircraft were dedicated not to dropping bombs, but to showering enemy cities and frontline troops with millions of paper leaflets. These leaflets were carefully crafted psychological tools. Some promised safe conduct to any soldier who surrendered, complete with elaborate illustrations of how to properly approach Allied lines. Others were designed to sow doubt and fear, reporting fictional victories or highlighting the grim realities of the war back home to demoralize troops who were already far from their families. A single sheet of paper fluttering down from the sky had the potential to erode an army's will to fight more effectively than a barrage of artillery. This duel of wits extended into the shadowy world of espionage, where paper was the preferred medium for clandestine communication. Spies relied on a whole arsenal of paper-based tradecraft. Messages were written in invisible ink, made from everything from lemon juice to sophisticated chemical compounds, between the innocuous lines of a seemingly ordinary love letter or business invoice. The most sensitive information was often reduced to a microdot, a photograph of a document shrunk to the size of a period on a typed page, which could then be glued into a piece of mail, completely undetectable to the casual observer. The choice of paper itself could be a signal. A specific type of stationery or a particular fold could indicate whether a dead drop was loaded or if a meeting was compromised. For a spy operating behind enemy lines, a scrap of paper contained not just information, but their very life, and its discovery could mean imprisonment or execution. Yet, for all its role in enabling conflict, paper also served as the fundamental instrument for its resolution. When the guns finally fell silent, it was on paper that peace was formally declared. The most consequential treaties in history, the Treaty of Westphalia, which ended the 30 Years' War, the Treaty of Versailles, which ended the First World War, were painstakingly drafted, debated, and ultimately signed on parchment or paper. These documents did more than just cease hostilities. They redrew the maps of continents, dissolved old empires, created new nations, and imposed conditions that would shape global politics for decades to come. The weight of a signature on that page carried the hopes of millions for a future free from war. In this ultimate paradox, the same material that guided armies and demoralized soldiers became the fragile yet essential vessel for peace, proving that paper's true nature was never inherently destructive, but rather a mirror reflecting the intentions, whether noble or terrible, of the human hands that held it. For centuries, the relationship between papermaking and the natural world was one of remarkable balance, even harmony. Ancient Chinese mills, drawing on the wisdom of their environment, relied on a closed-loop system. They used the fast-growing bark of the mulberry tree, a renewable resource that could be harvested annually without killing the plant, and they supplemented it with what we would now call post-consumer waste, discarded hemp rags, used fish nets, and linen scraps. Primary energy source was human or animal power, and the main chemical agent was simply water. The waste products were minimal and largely biodegradable. This model was sustainable by necessity, operating within the limits of local ecosystems and leaving a very light footprint on the earth. The Industrial Revolution of the 19th century shattered this delicate equilibrium, replacing a cycle of renewal with a linear system of extraction and waste. The invention of wood pulping was the pivotal moment that fundamentally changed paper's environmental equation. Suddenly, the limiting factor was no longer the supply of rags, but the vast, seemingly endless expanse of the world's forests. The hunger of the massive, steam-powered Fourdrinier machines was insatiable. Entire ancient forests in Europe and North America were clear-cut to feed the mills, leading to catastrophic soil erosion, loss of wildlife habitat, and the destruction of natural carbon sinks on an unprecedented scale. The method of pulping itself introduced a new horror: chemical pollution. The sulfite process, which used acidic chemicals to dissolve the lignin-binding wood fibers together, created a toxic effluent that was often dumped directly into rivers. These waterways, once teeming with life, were transformed into lifeless, foaming, foul-smelling conduits of industrial waste, poisoning downstream communities and ecosystems for generations. The paper boom had unleashed a silent, creeping environmental crisis, trading ecological health for the sake of abundance and convenience. The 20th century brought a dawning awareness of this cost, sparking the first major counter-movements. The visual blight of polluted rivers and the growing conservation movement, led by figures like Theodore Roosevelt in the United States, began to push for change. This led to early innovations like the craft process, which recovered and reused some of the cooking chemicals, and the rise of hydraulic dams to provide cleaner hydroelectric power for mills. However, the true paradigm shift began in the 1970s with the birth of the modern environmental movement. The iconic image of the Cuyahoga River in Ohio, so polluted it caught fire, became a national symbol of industrial negligence and galvanized public demand for regulation. Laws like the Clean Water Act in the United States forced mills to invest in massive wastewater treatment facilities, dramatically reducing the direct dumping of toxic chemicals. This era also saw the rise of a powerful new concept: recycling. The chasing arrows symbol became ubiquitous, and municipal recycling programs transformed used paper from a waste product into a valuable feedstock. The process of turning old newspapers, cardboard boxes, and office waste into new paper products significantly reduced the demand for virgin wood pulp, saving countless trees and requiring less energy and water than processing raw timber. Yet, recycling is not a perfect solution. Each time paper is recycled, its fibers become shorter and weaker, limiting the number of times it can be reprocessed. The de-inking process also creates its own sludge of waste, containing inks, adhesives, and fillers that must be disposed of, often in landfills. Furthermore, the global recycling market is volatile, revealing that our solution to waste is still fragile and economically fraught. Today, the industry stands at a crossroads, grappling with its legacy while innovating for a greener future. The push for sustainability has led to the widespread adoption of Forest Stewardship Council (FSC) certification, ensuring paper comes from responsibly managed forests that prioritize biodiversity and regeneration. There is also an exciting renaissance in exploring alternative fibers that harken back to ancient wisdom. Researchers and forward-thinking companies are now making paper from agricultural waste, the leftover straw from wheat and rice harvests, the bagasse from crushed sugar cane, and even from fast-growing, invasive plants like bamboo and kenaf. These materials not only reduce pressure on forests but also turn agricultural byproducts, which are often burned, contributing to air pollution, into a valuable resource. Perhaps the most profound lesson from paper's long environmental history is that no technology exists in a vacuum. Its impact is a direct reflection of human choices between extraction and stewardship, between waste and circularity. The story of paper shows us that sustainability is not about abandoning useful materials, but about innovating to use them wisely. It teaches us that the solutions of the past, like using renewable plants and creating closed-loop systems, can be brilliantly repurposed with modern knowledge to build a more responsible future. This ancient invention, which carries the weight of our history, now also carries the responsibility for our planet's health, challenging us to write its next chapter with greater care and consciousness. Back in the 1990s, as personal computers began landing on desks and the internet started weaving its way into homes, a bold prediction took hold. The dawn of the digital age would finally bring about the long-forecast paperless office and eventually a paperless society. Futurists envisioned a world where screens would render physical documents utterly obsolete, where forests would be saved by the sheer power of microchips and pixels. And yet here we are, decades into this digital revolution, and the demand for paper has not only persisted but in many areas remains stubbornly robust. This is the great paradox of our time. The very technology that was supposed to replace paper has instead entered into a complex and often surprising coexistence with it. We now live in a hybrid world where the tap of a keyboard is often followed by the satisfying rustle of a freshly printed page. So why has this ancient technology proven so resilient? The answer lies not in a failure of digital innovation, but in a profound understanding of human psychology and the unique, irreplaceable qualities of paper itself. There is a deep, almost primal comfort in its physicality. The weight of a book in your hands, the texture of its cover, the sound of a turning page, these are sensory experiences that a sleek, cool glass screen simply cannot replicate. This tactile engagement creates a different kind of relationship with the information. Studies in cognitive science, particularly the work of researchers like Anne Mangen, have shown that reading on paper promotes better comprehension and retention of complex texts. The physical act of turning pages provides spatial landmarks in our mind. We remember an idea was at the top of a left-hand page near the beginning of a chapter, creating a cognitive map that a scrolling, featureless digital page cannot. For deep, immersive reading, for study, and for reflection, the analog nature of paper reduces distraction and allows for a focus that is constantly challenged by the pings, notifications, and infinite tabs of a connected device. Beyond the page, paper's persistence is anchored in domains where its physical properties convey authority, permanence, and trust. Consider the world of law and official documentation. A digital contract can be copied, altered, or deleted with a few keystrokes, its authenticity always in question. But a signed paper contract with its unique ink signatures, official letterhead, and perhaps even a notary's raised seal carries an undeniable weight of finality and legitimacy. It is a singular object, a primary source whose authenticity can be physically verified. The same is true for birth certificates, diplomas, deeds, and wills. These are not just records, they are tangible artifacts of our most important life events. We want to hold them, to file them away in a safe place, because their physical existence feels synonymous with the reality of the accomplishment or agreement they represent. This principle of trust extends directly into our wallets. While digital payments and cryptocurrencies are on the rise, physical paper currency and coins remain a foundational part of every global economy. A banknote is a remarkable piece of technology. It's durable, difficult to counterfeit due to intricate watermarks and security threads, and most importantly, it functions universally without the need for electricity, internet access, or a point-of-sale device. In a power outage or a remote area, cash is king. Its resilience highlights how paper often serves as a critical backup system, a reliable analog failsafe in an increasingly digital and sometimes fragile infrastructure. Perhaps the most visible testament to paper's enduring appeal is the continued health of the physical book market. Despite the convenience of e-readers that can store thousands of titles in a device thinner than a single paperback, print books have not only survived but have seen a notable resurgence. There is an emotional connection to a personal library, to the sight of a well-loved book on a shelf that serves as a reminder of the journey it took you on. Books are shared, gifted, collected, and displayed in a way that digital files are not. They are designed objects where the choice of font, paper stock, and cover art are part of the artistic experience. Furthermore, the packaging industry, fueled by the e-commerce boom, relies almost entirely on paper and cardboard. That thrill of receiving a delivered box, the ritual of unboxing a new product, these are experiences built around paper that digital commerce has ironically amplified, not diminished. The story, then, is not one of simple replacement but of symbiosis. The digital age didn't kill paper, it redefined its role. It automated the mundane. We no longer print out endless emails or memos, which in turn elevated paper's use to things that matter more: cherished books, official records, meaningful packaging, and personal notes. Paper has settled into niches where its physical, tactile, and trustworthy nature provides a value that pure digital convenience cannot match. It thrives because it satisfies a fundamental human desire for tangible connection and permanence in an increasingly ephemeral and virtual world. This enduring partnership between the oldest communication technology and the newest suggests that the future won't be paperless after all, but rather a more thoughtful and intentional balance between the pixel and the page. While Cai Lun stands as the iconic figure in paper's origin story, the true history of this material is a vast tapestry woven by countless unnamed hands and ingenious minds across centuries and continents. These were the unsung heroes, the artisans, tinkerers, and often overlooked entrepreneurs who took a foundational idea and, through generations of trial and error, refined it into a world-changing technology. Their motivations were as varied as their contributions: a drive for artistic perfection, the practical need to earn a living, or simply the quiet satisfaction of solving a persistent problem. To tell the story of paper is to celebrate these innovators whose collective genius transformed humble pulp into the bedrock of civilization. Consider the paper mills of medieval Europe, which were often family-run businesses. In a surprising twist that challenges our traditional historical narratives, many of these mills were operated and managed by women, particularly widows who inherited the trade from their husbands. In regions like France and Italy, legal records and mill ledgers from the 13th and 14th centuries frequently list women as the proprietors. These women were not mere caretakers, they were savvy business owners who understood the intricacies of production, managed finances, negotiated contracts with rag collectors and scribes, and ensured the quality of the final product. Their role was crucial in stabilizing and expanding the paper industry during a critical period of its growth in the West, proving that the spread of knowledge was, in part, powered by the business acumen and determination of these female pioneers. Across the world, a parallel story of exquisite refinement was taking place in Japan, where the art of making washi paper became elevated to a spiritual practice. Japanese artisans, often working in small, rural communities, transformed the fibers of the kozo, mitsumata, and gampi plants into a product of breathtaking strength and beauty. The process was incredibly meticulous, relying on patience and a deep, intuitive understanding of natural materials. The fibers were harvested by hand, carefully cooked, and then painstakingly cleaned to remove every last impurity. The formation of the sheet itself was an act of artistry, using a complex sugata screen that was rocked back and forth in a vat of slurry, not to simply drain water, but to meticulously align the long fibers in multiple directions. This technique, unique to Japanese papermaking, is what gives washi its legendary durability and distinctive, soft luster. These artisans weren't just making paper, they were crafting a medium that would become central to Japanese culture, used for everything from shoji screens and lanterns that diffused a gentle light to strong, flexible paper for books and most famously for the intricate art of origami. The spirit of innovation continued into the industrial era, driven by figures like Nicolas Louis Robert and the Fourdrinier brothers. Robert, a frustrated clerk in a French paper mill, envisioned a machine to end the labor disputes and inconsistencies of hand production. His initial patent for a continuous papermaking machine was a stroke of brilliance, though he lacked the funds to develop it. It was the Fourdrinier brothers, Henry and Seeley, who recognized the machine's potential and invested their entire fortune into perfecting it, a gamble that ultimately bankrupted them personally, even as their invention went on to revolutionize global industry. Their story is a classic tale of innovation, the visionary inventor paired with the ambitious, if unfortunate, financiers who bet everything on a world-changing idea. This legacy of ingenuity continues right into the present day, with modern material scientists and environmental engineers acting as the latest chapter in this long story. Today's innovators are tackling the environmental challenges inherited from the industrial boom, developing closed-loop systems that recycle water and chemicals within mills, and creating new types of paper from agricultural waste like straw, banana leaves, and even stone dust. They are the unsung heroes of our time, working to reconcile our need for this fundamental material with the urgent necessity of planetary stewardship, ensuring that the ancient story of paper will have many more pages yet to write. Before paper, the very act of learning was an exercise in privilege, constrained by the staggering cost and scarcity of writing surfaces. In medieval European universities, a student's education was often measured out not in lessons, but in the precious parchment required to record them. A single textbook, painstakingly copied by hand onto treated animal skins, could be worth as much as a small farm or a townhouse, effectively chaining these repositories of knowledge to the libraries of the wealthy or the church. This economic barrier meant that scholarship was largely the domain of those born into means or those who pledged their lives to religious orders, where access to books was part of the vocation. Education was a fortress, and its gates were guarded by the exorbitant price of something we now take for granted: a blank page. The arrival of affordable paper didn't just lower the cost of books, it dismantled the entire fortress wall. With the establishment of paper mills across Europe, the production of text shifted from an artisanal, one-off craft to a more scalable industry. While the initial copies of a work might still be expensive, the ability to produce subsequent copies far more cheaply on paper rather than parchment created a trickle-down effect of knowledge. For the first time, a growing merchant class, lawyers, and skilled artisans could begin to assemble personal libraries. They could own their own copies of legal codes, philosophical treatises, and eventually, with the advent of the printing press, novels and pamphlets. This ownership was transformative. It allowed for private study, for cross-referencing different texts, and for forming one's own conclusions outside the lecture hall. Knowledge was no longer a fleeting sound in a classroom. It became a permanent possession that could be revisited, questioned, and shared. Perhaps the most profound shift occurred in the hands of the students themselves. The availability of cheap paper meant that for the first time, a student could afford to own a notebook. This simple tool revolutionized the pedagogy of learning. Instead of passively listening to a professor read from a single, authoritative text, a practice necessary when books were too rare and expensive for each student to have, scholars could now actively engage. They could jot down their own notes, paraphrase complex arguments in their own words, sketch diagrams, and work through problems on a personal canvas. This transition from auditory memorization to visual note-taking fostered deeper cognitive processing, critical thinking, and personal interpretation. The notebook became an externalization of the individual's mind at work, a log of their intellectual journey that they could carry with them, transforming education from a communal recitation into a personal dialogue with knowledge. This democratization of learning tools directly fueled a dramatic rise in literacy rates. As books and writing materials became more common, the ability to read and write shifted from a specialized professional skill for scribes and clergy to a marker of general education. Governments and reformists began to see the value in an educated populace, leading to the gradual establishment of public schooling systems. The textbook, now a mass-produced commodity on paper, became the standard vehicle for a standardized curriculum, ensuring that children in cities and towns across a country were learning from the same core body of knowledge. This creation of a shared intellectual foundation was crucial for building modern nation-states and fostering a sense of common identity and civic responsibility. The ultimate consequence of this paper-enabled literacy was an unprecedented engine for social mobility. With the ability to read, an individual could access the accumulated wisdom of the ages without a wealthy patron or a priest as an intermediary. They could study law, medicine, or theology from books, opening up professions that were previously gatekept by class and connections. Ideas about natural rights, self-governance, and individual liberty, printed on inexpensive pamphlets and newspapers, spread like wildfire among a newly literate public. These ideas empowered people to question traditional authority, from the divine right of kings to the rigid structures of the old social order. The American and French revolutions were, in many ways, underwritten by paper. Their revolutionary constitutions and declarations were printed and distributed widely. creating a new contract between the governed and their government that every citizen could, in theory, read for themselves. In this way, paper did not just educate individuals, it educated entire societies, laying the foundational literacy upon which modern democracies were built and sustained. Imagine lugging a heavy sack of metal coins across a bustling market, each transaction requiring careful weighing and testing for purity just to buy a loaf of bread or a bolt of cloth. This was the cumbersome reality of commerce for centuries, where the very medium of exchange was a physical burden, limiting the scale and speed of trade. Then, in a stroke of visionary genius during the Tang Dynasty in 7th century China, merchants and officials began experimenting with a radical solution. They started depositing their heavy bronze coins with trusted intermediaries, receiving in return a simple paper receipt. This receipt, a promise to pay the bearer the stated value in coin, could be traded as easily as a note. It was lighter, easier to secure, and far more convenient. What began as a private practice among merchants evolved into an official state policy under the Song Dynasty with the introduction of the jiaozi, the world's first government-issued paper money. This wasn't just a new kind of currency, it was a complete reimagining of value itself, decoupling wealth from a physical object and placing it in the abstract realm of trust and promise. The rewards of this system were nothing short of revolutionary for global trade and economic development. Paper money acted as a powerful lubricant for commerce, drastically reducing the friction and risk associated with moving vast quantities of precious metal over long, perilous trade routes like the Silk Road. A merchant no longer had to fear bandits stealing a fortune in gold. They could carry their wealth in a folded slip of paper, their trust placed not in the weight of the metal but in the authority and stability of the issuing body, be it a merchant guild or the imperial government itself. This facilitated an explosion in the scale of trade, allowing capital to flow more freely and quickly across regions, financing larger ventures and connecting markets that were once isolated. More profoundly, it laid the philosophical groundwork for the entire architecture of modern finance. The concept that a piece of paper could represent value gave rise to an entire ecosystem of financial instruments, letters of credit, bills of exchange, and eventually stocks and bonds. This abstraction of value is the very bedrock of capitalism and modern banking, enabling the complex, interconnected global economy we know today. It allowed for the creation of capital out of confidence, turning trust into the most valuable currency of all. Yet, this incredible power came with a perilous and inherent risk that Chinese authorities quickly discovered: the temptation of the printing press. For a government facing a budget shortfall, a war to finance, or a massive public project to complete, the ability to simply print more money rather than raise taxes or mine more silver was an irresistible shortcut. Without the natural scarcity imposed by precious metal reserves, the supply of paper currency could be inflated rapidly and dramatically. The Yuan and Ming dynasties learned this lesson the hard way, printing such excessive amounts of paper money to fund their military campaigns and grandiose projects that the currency became virtually worthless, leading to hyperinflation, a complete collapse of public trust, and economic chaos. This early experiment with fiat currency money that has value only because a government says it does ended so disastrously that China largely abandoned paper money for centuries, reverting back to a silver-based economy. It was a stark demonstration that the very strength of paper money, its flexibility, was also its greatest vulnerability, entirely dependent on the discipline and credibility of its issuer. This delicate dance between trust and temptation has echoed through economic history ever since. In 18th century France, the Scottish financier John Law's ambitious Mississippi Company scheme involved issuing a flood of paper banknotes backed by supposed wealth from the New World. When the speculative bubble burst, it ruined thousands of investors and shook the French monarchy. Similarly, the American Revolution was funded by the Continental Congress printing continental dollars, a currency that rapidly depreciated to the point of being not worth a continental, a phrase that entered the lexicon to describe utter worthlessness. These crises highlight the fundamental psychological contract at the heart of paper money. Its value is a shared fiction, a collective agreement that can be shattered by greed or mismanagement. This volatility also created opportunities for both illicit gain and desperate innovation. The same ease of printing that allowed governments to fund themselves also gave rise to the ancient art of counterfeiting, forcing a never-ending arms race in security features, from intricate watermarks and raised printing to the sophisticated holograms and color-shifting inks we see on modern bills. Ultimately, the journey of paper currency is a story about the evolution of trust itself. It moved value from something you could hold and feel, a gold coin, a silver ingot, to an idea, a belief in the stability of an institution. It enabled the modern world by making economies fluid, dynamic, and expansive, but it also made them fragile, vulnerable to the whims of human psychology and the discipline of those in power. The risks of inflation and crisis are the perpetual price we pay for the immense rewards of economic agility and global connection. This profound innovation, born from the need to ease a merchant's burden, forever changed our relationship with money, transforming it from a tangible object into a promise, and placing the full weight of that promise on the fragile, enduring strength of a single sheet of paper. Yet, even as we look to high-tech horizons, the most profound shift might be a return to paper's ancient, sustainable roots through the development of truly biodegradable and alternative fiber papers. For over a century, the industry has relied on wood pulp, but a new wave of innovation is looking at waste not as a problem, but as a resource. Researchers and forward-thinking companies are now creating paper from some of the most unexpected materials imaginable. There is paper made from agricultural waste, like the straw left over after rice and wheat harvests, a material that farmers often burn, contributing significantly to air pollution. By pulping this straw, we can turn a source of smog into a source of stationery. Similarly, the bagasse fiber left over from crushing sugar cane is being transformed into sturdy food packaging and cardboard, giving this byproduct a valuable second life. The innovations get even more creative. Some companies are making paper from stone. By combining calcium carbonate, essentially crushed limestone, with a small amount of non-toxic plastic resin, they create a material that is water-resistant, incredibly durable, and most importantly, requires no trees or water to produce. Others are looking to the sea, cultivating fast-growing algae that can be harvested and processed into a unique, textured paper. There's even paper being developed from the fibers of discarded denim jeans, coffee husks, and fallen leaves. These aren't just niche curiosities, they represent a fundamental rethinking of the paper life cycle, moving from a linear model of take, make, waste to a circular, cradle-to-cradle approach. These new papers are often fully biodegradable and compostable, designed to return safely to the earth without leaving a trail of microplastics or toxins, effectively closing the loop on paper's environmental impact and addressing the legacy of pollution from its industrial past. But the future of paper isn't just about becoming more sustainable, it's about becoming smarter. The emerging field of smart paper aims to merge the tangible, familiar experience of paper with the dynamic capabilities of the digital world. Imagine a sheet of paper that can change the text it displays. This is the promise of electrochromic paper, which uses tiny electrical charges to make special inks appear or disappear, allowing a single sheet to be rewritten thousands of times, an endless notebook that never runs out of pages. For packaging, smart labels with printed sensors can do far more than just display a barcode. They can monitor the condition of the product inside, changing color if the temperature rises too high during shipping, indicating that frozen food has thawed and refrozen, or if the seal has been broken, tampering with a pharmaceutical product. This provides a layer of safety and quality assurance that static labels simply cannot offer. The integration goes even deeper with the development of paper-based electronics. Using conductive inks that can be printed onto paper just like regular ink, engineers are creating simple circuits, antennas, and even batteries directly on the page. This technology could lead to interactive books where a child touches a picture of a lion to hear its roar, or educational textbooks where a diagram of the human heart comes to life with a simple tap. In the world of logistics, a cardboard shipping box could contain a printed sensor that tracks its location and records any shocks or impacts it experiences during its journey, transmitting that data to a receiver the moment it's delivered. This seamless fusion of the physical and digital, all on a lightweight, inexpensive, and recyclable paper substrate, opens up a universe of possibilities that respect the past while embracing the future. The path forward for this ancient material is not a single road, but a branching tree of possibilities. In the coming decades, we are likely to see a great divergence in paper's use. For transient information, the daily news, office memos, shipping labels, the digital screen will likely continue to dominate. But for experiences that demand tactility, permanence, and deep focus, traditional paper made from sustainable sources will not only endure but may be valued even more highly as a conscious choice against digital distraction. And in between these two, a whole new category of interactive, smart paper will emerge, creating hybrid experiences that leverage the best of both worlds. The future of paper, therefore, is not about replacement, but about reinvention and thoughtful application, ensuring that this 2,000-year-old technology continues to evolve, adapt, and surprise us, finding new ways to connect us to information and to each other. For centuries, much of what we understood about the early history of paper came from a handful of ancient texts and a precious few surviving documents, creating a narrative that was largely theoretical. But the true, tangible evidence has been slowly and miraculously emerging from the most unlikely of places, the parched, arid deserts and sealed tombs that have acted as near-perfect time capsules. In the dry sands of the Taklamakan Desert, along the ancient Silk Road routes in western China, archaeologists have made discoveries that are quietly rewriting the story. They haven't just found crumbling scrolls in forgotten libraries. They've unearthed paper fragments in contexts that are utterly surprising, revealing a material integrated into the very fabric of daily life in ways we never imagined. One of the most profound and intimate revelations comes from the Astana graves in Turpan, China, a vast necropolis for the inhabitants of the ancient Gaochang kingdom. Here, the extreme dryness mummified the dead and perfectly preserved their grave goods. Among these offerings, excavators found something startling: paper shoes. These were not fine, decorative items, but practical, sturdy footwear made from recycled paper, often old official documents or discarded letters that were repulped and fashioned into soles and uppers. This humble application tells a powerful story. It shows that by the 6th or 7th century, paper had become so commonplace, so affordable and abundant, that it was considered a suitable material for something as utilitarian as shoe leather for the afterlife. It provides a silent commentary on social economics, suggesting that paper was no longer a precious commodity reserved for the elite scribe or the imperial court, but a versatile material accessible even to commoners for their most basic needs. Even more evocative are the finds from Dunhuang, the famous Buddhist cave complex that served as a major spiritual and cultural hub. Within these caves, alongside the breathtaking painted murals and towering statues, archaeologists discovered a trove of paper relics that go far beyond sacred texts. They found delicate paper flowers and colorful paper streamers, ritual objects used to decorate altars and shrines for religious ceremonies. They uncovered paper sculptures and symbolic offerings, all designed to be burned in ceremonial fires, their smoke carrying prayers heavenward. This ritual use points to paper's spiritual significance, a lightweight, transformable medium that could symbolize the ephemeral nature of life and the ascent to enlightenment. It wasn't just a surface for words, it was an active participant in worship, a physical substance that could be crafted into objects of devotion and then released in a transformative act of faith. Perhaps the most haunting and personal finds are the paper artifacts associated with burial itself. In several tombs, small, carefully cut paper figures have been discovered. These weren't playful toys, they were minki or spirit goods, representations of servants, soldiers, animals, and even entire houses. The ancient Chinese believed these paper effigies would accompany the deceased into the afterlife, serving them for eternity. This practice, which replaced the earlier and far more brutal tradition of burying live people and animals with a ruler, shows a remarkable evolution in thought and compassion, all enabled by the versatility of paper. It could quite literally stand in for a human life, a testament to its perceived potency and symbolic power. Each of these fragments, whether a shoe, a flower, or a figurine, is a tiny window into the mundane and the magnificent moments of a lost world. They challenge the sterile timeline that begins with Cai Lun's official report in 105 CE, pushing the material's use further back into history and outward into a much wider range of human activity. They tell us that paper's first revolution wasn't in a scholar's studio, but in the everyday lives of ordinary people, in the shoes on their feet, the decorations in their temples, and the offerings at their graves. These silent relics ask us to expand our definition of what paper was for, moving beyond the written word to appreciate its role as a truly multifunctional material that shaped culture, religion, and society from the ground up. This incredible portability and reproducibility of sacred texts fundamentally transformed how religions grew and connected with their followers. Before paper, a holy book was often a singular, monumental object, a heavy scroll of parchment or a set of cumbersome bamboo slabs tethered to a temple or a royal library, accessible only to a privileged few who could journey to it. Paper changed this dynamic completely. It allowed for the creation of multiple, identical copies of scriptures that could be carried by missionaries, merchants, and pilgrims across vast distances. A Buddhist monk could now travel the Silk Road with a satchel containing the essence of his faith, paper copies of sutras that could be read, studied, and copied again in a new land. This wasn't merely about convenience, it was about the democratization of the divine. The word of God or the teachings of the Buddha were no longer locked away in a sacred fortress. They could be in the home of a merchant, in the saddlebag of a traveler, or in the hands of a student, making spirituality a personal, accessible experience rather than a remote ceremony. This power of replication also brought a new level of consistency and orthodoxy to religious practice. In the centuries when texts were copied by hand onto parchment, even the most diligent scribe could introduce small variations, errors, or personal interpretations with each new generation of copies. Over time, these minor changes could accumulate, leading to significant doctrinal drift and the emergence of competing versions of the same sacred story. The advent of paper and later the printing press acted as a powerful break on this natural fragmentation. Once a master version of a text was set and then reproduced on a large scale, it became the definitive standard. For Christianity, the Gutenberg Bible provided a stable, authoritative text that could be distributed across Europe, ensuring that congregations from Rome to Rotterdam were reading from the same page quite literally. This standardization helped centralize religious authority, allowing institutions like the Vatican to maintain tighter control over doctrine and counter what they viewed as heresy with a unified, official version of the truth. Yet paper's role in faith extends far beyond the pages of a book. It is deeply woven into the physical rituals and symbolic practices that define spiritual life. In Shinto shrines across Japan, worshippers write their prayers and wishes on small rectangular pieces of paper called ima. These are then hung on special boards, their messages fluttering in the wind as a tangible offering to the kami, or spirits, a direct and personal line of communication between the human and the divine. In the Jewish tradition, the concept of respect for sacred texts is so profound that even a worn-out or damaged paper scroll containing the name of God cannot be simply thrown away. These documents are reverently collected and stored in a geniza, a sacred repository, before eventually being given a formal burial in a cemetery, acknowledging the holiness inherent in the very material that carries the word. Perhaps one of the most poignant examples of paper's spiritual symbolism is the global tradition of the origami crane. This practice was powerfully elevated by the story of Sadako Sasaki, a young girl who developed leukemia as a result of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. Inspired by the legend that anyone who folds 1,000 paper cranes would be granted a wish, she embarked on a project to fold them, praying for peace and healing. Though she passed away before completing her goal, her classmates finished the task, and her story turned a simple folded paper crane into an international symbol of peace, hope, and the resilience of the human spirit. In this act, paper transcends being a mere medium. It becomes an active participant in prayer, a physical manifestation of a wish, a vehicle for healing intentions that are folded directly into its very fibers. This deepens the spiritual connection by making faith something you don't just read or hear, but something you do and create with your own hands, merging the material and the metaphysical in a single, humble sheet. Yet for all its power to build empires and spread divine truth, paper also possesses a shadowy twin, a capacity for deception and subversion that authorities have feared since its invention. This very same quality that made it a perfect vehicle for standardization, its ability to create countless identical, authoritative-looking copies, also made it the ultimate tool for the forger, the counterfeiter, and the dissident operating in the shadows. A single, skilled hand with the right materials could now challenge the might of kings and the stability of economies, all from a hidden basement press. The history of paper is not just one of enlightenment. It is also a gripping chronicle of cunning, rebellion, and the eternal cat and mouse game between those who seek to control information and those determined to set it free. Consider the ancient and perpetual art of counterfeiting, an act that strikes at the very heart of a state's authority. The moment China introduced the world's first paper money, it inadvertently created a new criminal profession. The temptation was simply too great. If a government could create wealth by printing symbols on paper, why couldn't a clever individual do the same? Early Chinese forgers faced brutal punishments, including execution, yet the practice persisted, forcing the state into a continuous arms race of security features. They embedded bronze plaques in their bills, used intricate color patterns, and even printed money on paper made from a specific, secret mulberry bark recipe. This battle between printer and forger has never ceased. During the American Civil War, nearly a third of all currency in circulation was believed to be counterfeit. printed by both opportunistic criminals and Confederate operatives aiming to destabilize the Union economy by flooding it with fake greenbacks. This wasn't just theft, it was a form of economic warfare waged with ink and paper, demonstrating how the trust essential to paper currency could be weaponized against the very system that created it. Beyond money, paper became the essential medium for the most consequential deceptions in history, forged documents that altered destinies. In medieval Europe, a cleverly fabricated land deed or a letter of nobility on convincing parchment could elevate a commoner's family into the aristocracy for generations. But the stakes reached their zenith with religious forgeries. The most famous example is the Donation of Constantine, a document that surfaced in the 8th century. It purported to be a 4th century edict from Emperor Constantine the Great, granting the Pope and his successors political control over Rome and the entire Western Roman Empire. For centuries, this piece of paper was the bedrock of the papacy's claim to temporal power, used to assert authority over emperors and kings. It was only during the Renaissance that scholars, using the new tools of textual criticism, proved it was an elaborate fake, likely created to bolster the power of the Church during a period of intense political struggle. The revelation that the Church's vast political influence had been justified by a forgery was a seismic shock that helped fuel the Protestant Reformation, proving that a single piece of paper, if believed for long enough, could literally shape the map of Europe. Recognizing this dangerous power, those in authority have always sought to control it, leading to the most visceral and symbolic act of suppression, the burning of books. From the Qin dynasty in China, which ordered the destruction of philosophical texts to enforce legalist doctrine, to the infamous Nazi book burnings of the 1930s, where students and officials threw works by Jewish, socialist, and un-German authors into roaring bonfires, the destruction of paper has been a terrifying public spectacle designed to annihilate ideas and terrorize. Dissent. The Spanish Inquisition maintained an index of forbidden books and regularly held autos da fe, not just for people but for texts deemed heretical. The act of burning was meant to be a purification, a literal and figurative cleansing of dangerous thoughts from the community. Yet, this oppressive act often had the opposite effect, immortalizing the very ideas it sought to erase and revealing a profound truth about paper's resilience. While a single copy can be destroyed, the idea it carries, once released into the world, is far more difficult to extinguish. And it is in response to this suppression that paper reveals its most heroic role as the lifeblood of resistance. When official channels are closed, paper becomes the medium of the underground. In Tsarist Russia, revolutionaries operated secret presses, publishing pamphlets and newspapers with names like Iskra the Spark, which were passed from hand to hand, slowly kindling the flames of revolt. In Nazi-occupied Europe, countless underground newspapers, often typed onto stencils and printed on whatever paper could be scavenged, provided populations with uncensored news from the Allies and words of encouragement, a vital psychological weapon against despair and propaganda. Perhaps the most poignant example is the samizdat tradition in the Soviet Union and its Eastern Bloc satellites. Meaning self-published, samizdat was a clandestine process where a forbidden text, an essay by Solzhenitsyn, a play by Václav Havel, a poem by Akhmatova, would be painstakingly typed and retyped, often with carbon paper to make multiple copies, and then passed along a chain of trusted readers. Each person who read it became a new node of distribution, a guardian of the text, knowing that possession could mean imprisonment. This human-powered, paper-based network became a mighty river of free thought flowing beneath the frozen surface of the totalitarian state, proving that the humble typewriter and a stack of paper could pose a greater threat to a superpower than any bomb. This is the ultimate duality of paper, a material so fragile it can be torn with a touch or erased by a flame, yet so powerful it can challenge empires, safeguard truth, and ensure that no idea once thought and written down is ever truly silenced. While the story of paper often focuses on its grand role in empires and revolutions, some of its most beautiful and resilient chapters were written in small, isolated communities where the craft became a profound expression of place and identity. Far from the industrial mills of Europe, a stunning diversity of papermaking traditions blossomed, each one a unique dialogue between human ingenuity and the local environment. These were not merely different recipes, they were entire cultural ecosystems where the very fiber of the paper was woven with the spirit of the people who made it. From the high Himalayas to the tropical forests of Mesoamerica, these unique practices reveal a world where paper was never an anonymous commodity, but a living artifact of cultural heritage. High in the rugged mountains of Nepal for over 1,000 years, a remarkable paper has been crafted from the inner bark of the Locta shrub. This isn't just any plant, it's a botanical marvel of sustainability. Locta grows on steep, rocky slopes where other crops cannot, and when it is harvested, it is cut in a way that encourages the root system to send up new shoots, ensuring the plant regrows vigorously. This makes it a perfectly renewable resource, one that has supported Himalayan communities for generations. The process itself is a communal art. The bark is boiled, hand-beaten to separate the fibers, and then the slurry is poured onto a wooden screen mold, often held together by strings of bamboo and dried in the sun. The resulting paper is instantly recognizable, incredibly durable, resistant to insects and moisture, and possessing a distinctive, slightly rough texture. Its strength and longevity made it the chosen medium for sacred Buddhist and Hindu texts, as well as for official government records, because a document written on Locta paper could endure for centuries. The very existence of Locta paper is a testament to a deep ecological wisdom, a craft perfected to thrive in one of the most challenging landscapes on Earth. A world away in the vibrant heart of Mexico, an even older tradition persists, the creation of amate paper. Its origins stretch back to the pre-Columbian era, where it held immense ritual and communicative power for the Maya and Aztec civilizations. Amate is made from the inner bark of wild fig or mulberry trees, and its creation was once so central to Mesoamerican culture that it was used as a form of tribute to Aztec rulers. The paper was far more than a writing surface. It was the canvas for codices, folded books that contained the astronomical knowledge, historical records, and spiritual beliefs of entire civilizations. The arrival of Spanish conquistadors who saw these codices as pagan objects led to a systematic campaign of destruction. The production of amate was brutally suppressed, and the knowledge was driven underground, kept alive in only a few remote indigenous communities. In a powerful story of cultural resilience, the craft has experienced a revival in recent decades. Today, in villages like San Pablito, artisans, primarily women, still beat the bark with volcanic stones on wooden boards, creating a sturdy, brown-tinged paper that is now famously painted with vibrant, colorful scenes of daily life, folklore, and nature, blending ancient technique with living artistic expression. Crossing the ocean to Japan, we find the epitome of paper refinement, washi. While we've touched on its role in culture, its production is a universe of regional variation. The Japanese didn't just make paper, they perfected it, and the specific type of washi from a town like Echizen or a village like Mino is as distinct as a fine wine from a particular terroir. The secret lies in the meticulous cultivation of specific plants kozo, mitsumata, and gampi, and the unparalleled skill of the artisans. the formation of the sheet is a hypnotic dance. The craftsman dips a sugeta, a flexible bamboo screen, into the vat of pulp and then rocks it with a precise, rhythmic motion, front to back, side to side. This isn't just to drain water, it is to expertly align the long, luxurious fibers in multiple directions, creating a sheet of incredible strength, flexibility, and a soft, luminous quality that diffuses light beautifully. This painstaking process, which can take over a decade to master, results in a paper that is used for everything from the most delicate shoji screens and lanterns to the strong, absorbent sheets perfect for the art of woodblock printing. Washi is so much more than a material. It is a national treasure, a symbol of Japanese aesthetics where beauty is found in subtlety, texture, and the patient hand of the master. These diverse traditions, from the rugged loctor to the luminous washi, profoundly enrich our understanding of paper by showing us that its history is not a single, linear path, but a sprawling, global tree with countless branches. They teach us that before paper was about mass production, it was about intimate connection, a connection to the local flora, to ancestral knowledge, and to community identity. Each sheet was a map of its origin, carrying within it the soil, the climate, and the spirit of the people who made it. These practices are not quaint relics, they are living libraries of sustainable technology and cultural philosophy. Their survival today, often threatened by the cheap uniformity of industrial paper and the dwindling number of master artisans, is a crucial struggle. To lose them would be to lose irreplaceable chapters in the human story, chapters that remind us that paper can be a testament not just to what we think, but to who we are and how we choose to live with the world around us. Imagine the painstaking work of a scientist like Charles Darwin, aboard the HMS Beagle, meticulously sketching the beak of a finch in his leather-bound notebook or scribbling pages of observations about the tortoises of the Galapagos. Each of those handwritten notes, each delicate diagram, was a puzzle piece in a theory that would fundamentally reshape our understanding of life itself. This was the indispensable role of paper in the scientific revolution. It was the silent, steadfast partner to genius, the physical medium upon which abstract curiosity could be captured, refined, and shared. Before digital sensors and cloud storage, the laboratory notebook was the ultimate instrument of record, a permanent ledger where a single observation made on a Tuesday afternoon could, years later, become the key to unlocking a universal truth. The very process of science, observe, hypothesize, experiment, record was built upon the reliable, tangible surface of a paper page. This wasn't just about private note-taking. Paper became the circulatory system of the scientific community, enabling the collaborative engine of peer review and publication that accelerates progress. The founding of the first scientific journals, like the Royal Society's Philosophical Transactions in 1665, created a formalized system for sharing discoveries. A scientist in London could conduct an experiment, write a paper detailing their methods and findings, and have it printed and distributed across Europe. This allowed other experts to scrutinize the work, attempt to replicate the results, and build upon them. This system of validation and constructive criticism, all conducted through the exchange of printed papers, is what separates modern science from isolated speculation. It creates a cumulative, self-correcting body of knowledge where each new discovery stands on the shoulders of the publications that came before it. The lengthy, footnoted academic paper, for all its formalities, is a testament to this rigorous dialogue, ensuring that ideas are tested by the community before they are accepted as fact. We can trace the lineage of countless breakthroughs directly back to seminal documents penned on paper. Isaac Newton's monumental Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, which laid out the laws of motion and universal gravitation, was a printed book that could be studied and debated by mathematicians across the continent. A century later, Marie Curie's detailed lab notebooks filled with data on radioactivity not only recorded the experiments that won her 2 Nobel Prizes, but also serve as powerful, if chilling, historical artifacts. Their pages remain too radioactive to handle safely today. Albert Einstein's Annus Mirabilis papers of 1905, including his work on the photoelectric effect and special relativity, were first sent to the Annalen der Physik journal, their dense mathematical equations and thought experiments laid out in ink for others to comprehend and challenge. Even the structure of life itself was revealed on paper. James Watson and Francis Watson famously sketched their model of the DNA double helix on scrap paper in their Cambridge lab, a simple drawing that captured the elegant mechanism of heredity. In each case, paper provided the essential platform to move a revolutionary idea from one brilliant mind into the shared consciousness of all humankind. The unique physicality of paper also played a crucial cognitive role in the creative process. There is a profound connection between the hand, the pen, and the brain that many scientists and thinkers have relied upon. The act of slowly drafting a complex equation or sketching a detailed diagram engages the mind in a different way than typing on a keyboard. It allows for non-linear thinking, doodling in the margins, drawing arrows connecting disparate ideas, annotating and revising in a fluid, tactile way. A lab notebook is not just a record of the successful final outcome. It is a chronological map of the entire scientific journey, complete with dead ends, messy mistakes, and sudden flashes of insight scribbled in the corner. This tangible history is invaluable, providing context and a record of the thought process that a folder of digital files can rarely capture with the same intimacy or accidental clarity. In this sense, paper was more than just a repository for finished ideas. It was an active participant in the creative forge, a partner in the slow, deliberate, and profoundly human work of scientific discovery. It turns out there's a fascinating scientific reason why the feel of a book or the weight of a document in your hand feels so different from scrolling on a screen, and it all comes down to how our brains are wired to process information. Cognitive psychologists and neuroscientists have begun to unravel this mystery, conducting studies that move beyond simple preference to measure the actual impact of reading medium on learning and memory. The findings are striking. Research, such as the work led by Anne Mangen at the University of Stavanger in Norway, consistently shows that people who read on paper demonstrate better comprehension of complex texts, particularly when it involves understanding the sequence of events, grasping the overall narrative arc, or recalling specific details. Readers using screens, by contrast, tend to overestimate their own understanding and often perform worse on tests requiring deeper synthesis of the material. This phenomenon isn't about intelligence or effort, it's about the unique cognitive map that physical media provides. When we read a printed book, we engage in what's called embodied cognition. The physicality of the object itself, the weight of the pages in your left hand growing lighter as those in your right grow heavier, the visual and tactile memory of a passage location creates a rich spatial landscape in our minds. We might remember that a crucial piece of information was near the top of a page on the left-hand side, or that a turning point in the argument came just after a heavy, glossy photograph. This spatial awareness acts as a series of mental anchors, helping us to organize, navigate, and retrieve information more effectively. A screen, by comparison, presents a uniform, ephemeral surface. Whether you're on page 10 or 100, the glass rectangle looks and feels exactly the same. Scrolling creates a continuous, fluid text with no fixed landmarks, making it far more challenging for the brain to create a reliable mental model of the information structure. This is why we often find ourselves mindlessly scrolling back and forth on a digital device, struggling to find a specific paragraph we just read, an experience far less common with a physical text where our spatial memory can guide us. Beyond navigation, the very nature of paper reduces cognitive load and minimizes distraction. A book is a single-task environment. It doesn't ping with notifications, tempt you with other open tabs, or offer a hyperlink to pull you down a rabbit hole every few sentences. This encourages a state of deep, focused immersion often referred to as flow, where the reader is fully absorbed and engaged with the text. Screens, designed for multifunctionality and rapid interaction, inherently promote a more shallow, skimming form of reading. Our brains have been conditioned to approach a screen with a different mindset, one suited for browsing and scanning for keywords, not for the slow, deliberate contemplation that deep learning and literary enjoyment require. The tactile experience itself also plays a crucial role. The simple act of turning a page provides a subtle but important kinesthetic break, a moment of micropause that allows the brain to process and compartmentalize the information it has just consumed before moving on. The texture of the paper, the smell of the ink, even the sound of a page turning, these sensory inputs create a richer, more memorable engagement with the content, forging stronger neural connections than the passive act of swiping on a smooth, cool, odorless piece of glass. This isn't to say digital media is inferior for all tasks. It is unparalleled for searching vast databases, for instant access to information, and for collaborative editing. But for deep reading, for study, and for the kind of absorption that allows ideas to truly settle and resonate, the science is increasingly clear. Paper provides a cognitive sanctuary, a focused, tangible, and spatially grounded medium that aligns with the way our brains have evolved to learn and remember. This deep-seated psychological need for tactile, undistracted engagement is a powerful force, ensuring that even in our digital age, the printed page retains its vital role as a catalyst for profound understanding. But this battle to save our paper heritage is fought on multiple fronts, and the enemies are as varied as they are relentless. The most obvious foe is simple time. The natural aging process of paper, known as degradation, is a constant, slow-motion crisis. The very thing that gives paper its strength, the cellulose fibers from plants, is also its greatest weakness. Over decades and centuries, exposure to oxygen and moisture in the air causes these fibers to break down through a process called oxidation, making the paper brittle, discolored, and so fragile it can crumble at a touch. This is especially true for paper made after the mid-19th century, when wood pulp became the standard. This paper contains lignin, a natural polymer in wood that, when exposed to light and air, produces acids that literally eat the paper from within, causing it to yellow and self-destruct in a phenomenon known as slow fire. A book from the 1800s can be in far more danger than a medieval parchment simply because of its acidic content. Compounding this internal decay are external threats that require constant vigilance. Insect infestations can be devastating. Silverfish, bookworms, and certain types of beetles view the cellulose, glues, and even the molds that grow on old paper as a gourmet feast, tunneling through pages and leaving behind a latticework of destruction. Then there is climate. Fluctuations in temperature and humidity cause paper to expand and contract, stressing the fibers and leading to cracking and warping. High humidity also encourages the growth of mold and foxing, those distinctive brown spots that bloom across old pages, which are caused by fungal activity or the oxidation of iron particles left in the paper during its manufacture. Even the light we use to view these treasures is a threat. as ultraviolet radiation accelerates the chemical reactions that lead to fading and brittleness. For a conservator, the reading room itself is a battlefield where every beam of light and every change in the air must be carefully managed. Faced with these overwhelming odds, conservators have developed a sophisticated arsenal of techniques to slow the march of time. The first and most critical line of defense is proper environmental control. Priceless documents are now housed in special collections rooms that are kept at a constant, cool temperature and a stable, low humidity, drastically slowing down chemical decay. Documents are stored in acid-free boxes and folders and are often placed in custom-made protective casings to shield them from physical handling and light. For items already under attack, conservators might perform delicate surgical treatments. This can include washing a document in deionized water to remove acidic compounds, or using a process called deacidification, where the paper is treated with an alkaline buffer, like magnesium oxide, to neutralize existing acids and create a protective reserve that will guard against future decay. Tears are mended with incredibly thin, almost invisible Japanese tissue paper and wheat starch paste, a reversible adhesive that won't damage the original document. Each of these treatments is a painstaking act of devotion, performed under microscopes by professionals who are equal parts scientist and artist, aiming not to make the document look new, but to stabilize it for the future while preserving every bit of its historical authenticity. Perhaps the most transformative tool in the modern conservator's kit is digitization. High-resolution photography and scanning allow us to create near-perfect digital surrogates of fragile manuscripts. This technology offers a powerful form of preventive conservation. Once a document is digitized, researchers and the public can access the digital copy millions of times without ever needing to touch the original, which can then be retired to the safety of its climate-controlled vault. Digitization also acts as a form of insurance, creating a backup copy of the information in case the original is ever lost to a catastrophic event like a fire or flood. Projects like the Vatican Library's effort to digitize its entire collection of ancient manuscripts or the British Library's work with its historic newspapers are monumental undertakings that democratize access to our shared history while providing the ultimate protection for the physical objects themselves. So why do we go to such extraordinary lengths and expense? Why does preserving a crumbling piece of paper matter? Because these documents are not merely artifacts, they are primary witnesses to history. They are the unedited first draft accounts of our human journey. A treaty signed on parchment contains the exact words that ended a war. A scientist's lab notebook shows the messy, brilliant process of discovery, complete with crossed-out mistakes and sudden insights scribbled in the margin. A letter from a soldier on the front lines, a hand-drawn map from an explorer, a ledger from a slave ship. These are the raw materials of history, offering perspectives and truths that no secondary textbook ever could. They connect us directly to the people of the past, to their thoughts, their fears, and their hopes in their own handwriting. To lose them is not just to lose an object, it is to lose a piece of our collective memory, a unique voice from the chorus of humanity that, once silenced, can never be recovered. Preserving them is an act of respect for those who came before us and a sacred duty to those who will come after, ensuring that the story of us remains as complete and as truthful as we can possibly make it. Beyond its role in history and science, paper has also carved out a powerful and enduring place in the heart of popular culture, becoming far more than a simple prop. It transforms into a potent symbol that carries the entire emotional weight of a story. Think of Anne Frank's diary, a simple checked notebook that became a sacred vessel for a young girl's voice amidst the unimaginable horror of the Holocaust. The very fact that her story was written on paper, hidden away in a secret annex, gives it a devastating intimacy and tangibility that a digital recording could never replicate. We imagine her putting pen to page, the physical act of writing a quiet act of defiance against the silence imposed upon her. That diary is not just a record, it is a character in itself, a silent witness and a symbol of memory itself, ensuring that the truth would not be erased even if she did not survive. Paper in this context becomes the guardian of a stolen life, a tangible piece of evidence against oblivion. This symbolic power extends into the realms of fantasy and adventure, where paper often holds the key to unlocking entire worlds. In the Harry Potter series, the Marauder's Map is a masterpiece of magical cartography, a single, enchanted piece of parchment that reveals the secret passages of Hogwarts and the real-time movements of everyone within it. It is a tool of immense power and mischief, but it is also a deeply personal artifact hand-drawn by Harry's father and his friends, their nicknames Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prong scrawled upon it. The map is more than a guide, it is a connection to the past, a piece of his father's legacy delivered on a material that feels ancient, personal, and full of secrets. It represents the idea that the most valuable knowledge is often hidden in plain sight, waiting on a piece of paper for the right person to command the magic words, "I solemnly swear I am up to no good." The world of superhero comics is perhaps the most direct and celebratory example of paper's role in modern mythology. The entire industry was built upon 4-color ink printed on cheap, pulpy paper, distributed to newsstands and into the hands of children. These flimsy pamphlets were the birthplace of modern gods like Superman, Batman, and Spider-Man. The very medium defined the experience, the smell of the newsprint, the tactile joy of turning a page to reveal a dynamic splash panel, the ability to carefully fold a cherished issue into a back pocket. Comic books are a unique art form where paper is the indispensable canvas. The vibrant art, the dialogue bubbles, and the narrative pacing are all designed around the physical turn of a page, using it to build suspense and deliver dramatic reveals. For generations, these paper-bound stories were not just entertainment, they were gateways to literacy, teaching kids about morality, justice, and complex storytelling, all through the power of sequential art on a page. Paper's narrative power also lies in its ability to represent identity and transformation. A birth certificate or a passport on paper can define a character's very existence, becoming a MacGuffin worth fighting for. A mysterious, yellowed letter discovered in an attic can unravel a family secret that drives a plot forward. In film, the rustle of a paper bag or the unfolding of a note can create moments of tremendous tension or heartwarming connection. From the love letters in the notebook to the whispered secrets in Harry Potter's enchanted diary, paper serves as a conduit for human emotion, a physical extension of a character's inner world. It connects audiences to narratives because we recognize it from our own lives, the ticket stub we save from a first date, the heartfelt card from a loved one, the doodles in a school notebook. Paper, in all these forms, is a mirror to our own experiences of memory, identity, and imagination, proving that even in our digital age, the most powerful magic is often found pressed between 2 pages. For all the clarity that ancient texts and archaeological finds provide, a tantalizing question continues to linger at the very edges of paper's history, whispered not from the deserts of China but from the jungles of Central America and the sands of Egypt. The traditional narrative is clear: paper was invented in China and its knowledge spread westward. But what if the story is not so linear? A small group of scholars and researchers point to a handful of enigmatic artifacts, suggesting that the human impulse to create a flat, flexible writing surface from plant fibers might have emerged independently in other ancient cultures, potentially even earlier than the Han Dynasty. This isn't just academic nitpicking, it's a challenge to a deeply held origin story proposing a more complex global tapestry of invention. The most compelling and controversial evidence comes from ancient Egypt. For centuries, we've accepted that the Egyptians used only papyrus, a material made by layering and pressing the pith of the cypress papyrus plant. But a few intriguing artifacts defy easy categorization. Some linen mummy wrappings from certain tombs display a surface that is suspiciously uniform and paper-like, leading to speculation that they might not be simply woven cloth, but an early proto-paper made from beaten linen fibers. The theory suggests that the Egyptians, masters of linen production, could have experimented with breaking down the fibers further, creating a pulp that was then formed into sheets. If true, this would represent a parallel invention, a different technological path to a similar goal. However, the evidence remains hotly contested. Mainstream Egyptologists largely attribute the smoothness of these linens to the meticulous weaving techniques, the tight wrapping process, and the effects of the mummification resins over millennia, not a deliberate papermaking process. Without a clear vat, mold, or recipe describing such a technique, the Egyptian paper hypothesis remains an alluring but unproven mystery. Far across the world, in the ancient civilizations of Mesoamerica, the plot thickens considerably. Here, we know for a fact that a unique paper-like material was not just present but central to religious and cultural life, amate or bark paper. The process for making amate, as preserved by indigenous communities in Mexico to this day, is distinct from both Chinese papermaking and Egyptian papyrus production. It involves soaking and then beating the inner bark of the wild fig or mulberry tree until the fibers separate and felt together into a sheet. The resulting material is strong, flexible, and was used by the Maya and Aztecs for creating codices, folded books that recorded their history, astronomy, and rituals. The critical question is one of timing. While the earliest surviving amate codices date from the post-classic period, the technology itself is undoubtedly ancient. Some researchers argue that the knowledge of bark papermaking could be far older, potentially stretching back to the earliest complex societies in the region. This doesn't necessarily mean it predates Chinese paper, but it powerfully demonstrates that the intellectual leap to create a formed sheet from plant fibers was not a one-time fluke in human history. It emerged separately, answering a similar cultural need for a durable medium for recording information. So why does this debate matter if the evidence is so ambiguous? Because it forces us to rethink the nature of innovation itself. The standard narrative of paper can sometimes feel like a relay race. China invents it, passes it to the Islamic world, who then pass it to Europe. This mystery suggests something far more interesting, that the same brilliant idea can spark into life in different times and places, born from local materials and needs. It's a concept known as simultaneous or parallel invention, and we see it throughout history with calculus, the telephone, and the theory of evolution. The desire to record, to communicate, and to preserve is a universal human drive. Is it so hard to believe that in different corners of the globe, with different plants at their disposal, ancient peoples arrived at similar solutions? The absence of overwhelming evidence for pre-Chinese paper doesn't necessarily prove it didn't exist. It may simply mean that such organic materials, unless preserved in the most extraordinary conditions, have returned to the earth without a trace. The true story of paper's origins may be far richer and more widespread than a single entry in a Han court ledger could ever suggest. waiting for one lucky, groundbreaking discovery to turn everything we think we know on its head. From its enigmatic origins in ancient Chinese workshops to its quiet persistence on our desks today, the story of paper is far more than a chronicle of a material. It is a mirror reflecting humanity's relentless drive to communicate, create, and connect. We've journeyed from the battlefields of Tollas, where captured artisans changed the course of history, to the scriptoriums of medieval monks who guarded the flame of knowledge. We've witnessed how this humble sheet empowered revolutions, both scientific and political, and became the unexpected backbone of global economies and spiritual life. Paper has been both a tool of immense control for empires and a weapon of liberation for the oppressed. Its resilience in our digital age is not a paradox but a testament to its deeply embedded role in the human experience, a role that transcends mere utility to touch something fundamental about how we learn, remember, and feel. So as you look around your world, notice the places where paper endures. It's in the weight of a favorite novel that no e-reader can truly replicate, its pages imbued with the memory of where you were when you first read it. It's in the official diploma handed to you on stage, a tangible symbol of years of effort that feels more real than any digital file. It's in the heartfelt greeting card saved in a drawer, the scribbled recipe from a grandparent, the unique texture of a paper currency note. These aren't just holdovers from a bygone era, they are conscious choices. We choose paper for the moments that matter because it engages our senses in a way that screens cannot. It offers a sense of permanence and authenticity in a fast-paced, virtual world, providing a tactile anchor to our most important experiences and ideas. This incredible 2,000-year journey reminds us that the most transformative technologies are often those that become so woven into the fabric of our lives that we almost stop seeing them. Paper is the silent partner to human progress, the unassuming stage upon which the drama of history has been written. It challenges us to think about the legacy of our own innovations. What will future generations say about our digital revolution? Will our cloud servers and social media feeds prove as durable as the Dead Sea Scrolls or the manuscripts of Timbuktu? The story of paper urges us to consider not just the efficiency of our tools, but their humanity, their ability to foster deep connection and endure the test of time. As we close this chapter, we're left with a simple yet profound invitation. The next time you pick up a book, write in a journal, or even fold a paper airplane, take a moment to appreciate the astonishing history you hold in your hands. That single sheet is a culmination of centuries of innovation, culture, and human curiosity. It's a bridge from our deepest past to our most imaginative future. So we'd love to hear from you. What's your relationship with paper? Do you have a cherished book, a saved letter, a tradition that relies on this ancient material? Share your stories in the comments below. Let's add another layer to this ongoing narrative. And if you enjoyed unraveling this mystery with us, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell for more journeys into the hidden stories that shape our world. Remember, every blank page is an opportunity, every printed word a piece of history. What story will you choose to tell on yours?